Hello everyone. The French writer and philosopher Renaud Camus has been handed a 2-year suspended prison sentence, as well as been given a €3,600 fine for his comments on immigration. The criminal charges were based on his calling mass immigration an invasion. So really he was simply echoing the sentiments of the Czech president Miloš Zeman, who back in 2015 called the wave of refugees into Europe an, quote, organised invasion. You may remember that Zeman, 5 years ago now, explained that the Muslim Brotherhood, lacking the resources to launch a military invasion on the continent, was sending wave after wave of migrants as an alternative force. 5 years on, after the trail of death and destruction that Muslims have left in France, and this is still a controversial subject to talk about. So just think about what that means for a moment. A 2-month suspended prison sentence. That's very serious. Now, the news reports that he will only avoid jail by paying a sum of euros. Some are saying 1,800, others are saying over 3,000. I suppose that's yet to be decided. To 2 quote-unquote anti-racist organisations, one of which is SOS Racism, and the other is the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism. The writer was charged with public incitement to hate or violence on the basis of origin, ethnicity, nationality, race or religion, and the conviction stems from a November 2017 speech he delivered in Colombie, Les Deux Églises, in which he declared, quote, "Immigration has become an invasion," end quote.
L'immigration est devenue invasion, l'invasion, submersion migratoire.
It appears the main contention with the speech was the following lines, quote, "The irreversible colonization is demographic colonization by the replacement of the population. The ethnic substitution, the great replacement, is the most important event in the history of our nation since it has existed. As with other people, if the story continues, it will not be that of France," end quote. He also called for a national consensus of resistance to oppose Islamization in the, quote, "struggle for the salvation of our common civilization, Celtic, Slavic, Germanic, Greek, Latin, Judeo-Christian." The part of Camus' speech that specifically garnered the attention of judges was when he talked about European people being replaced. He said that mass immigration, quote, "is the substitution, the tendency to substitute everything with its emulator, normalized, standardized, interchangeable, the original with its copy, the authentic with its imitation, the true with the false, the mothers with surrogate mothers, the culture with free time and entertainment," end quote. France, of course, suffers Islamic terrorist attacks on such a routine basis now that it's barely even an important news story anymore. Many of those terrorists are radicalized by mosques that entirely escape any police security, but Camus must be punished for his crime of opinion. So he's going to have to pay more or less hate speech reparations to these 2 charities. Again, we have SOS Racism and LICRA, which is the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism, I believe, comes from a charge made by a one Yann Moix. That was because back in 2017, Moix described Renaud Camus as a, quote, "fairly anti-Semitic writer." This incensed Camus so much that he decided to take legal action against the charge on the charges of slander. Bizarrely, the court ruled actually on appeal in Camus' favour, but when this other gentleman appealed the appeal, he in fact won, so Camus ended up having to pay out once again. Interestingly, in this case, Yann Moix managed to win his appeal because the court decided that what he said about Camus, that is calling him an anti-Semite, was just an opinion, and that his remarks fell from, quote, "the expression of an opinion and a value judgment on the personality of the civil party, and not the imputation of a specific fact." In other words, one can now qualify someone as anti-Semitic without evidence on the sole basis of words lent, reported or even invented. Camus' lawyer, one Johann Renaud, said that basically it doesn't matter the truth, it doesn't matter whether Camus is anti-Semitic or not in the eyes of the cassation judge. So I suppose the way to really understand this is as France's version of Count Dankula, except the content of what Camus is talking about is immensely serious. It is an allegation of population exchange, which makes it a civic rights issue that affects us all. So he's a damn hero for doing this. It's brave for him to say this, certainly in intellectual public life, because he is a very prominent figure in France. Here's the situation, gang. We're being demographically replaced, and it's now a punishable offence to say as such. Really, my belief here is very simple. It's a question of safety in numbers. You must push yourself to have the confidence to talk about the Great Replacement. Now, obviously, you ought to be judicious. Don't do it in the workplace. But the best thing you can do to support people like Camus is, as Shakespeare said, you've got to screw your courage to the sticking point, okay? The rapid demographic changes are very serious, and what we are now talking about is actually a major human rights issue. This situation has long crossed into the realm of the highly criminal. And what really upsets me about this, with regards to Camus, is what a lovely gentleman he is. There's nothing remotely antagonistic, aggressive, violent-minded, or threatening about what he says. And frankly, it shouldn't make any difference if there were. So please, if you wish, just show your support for Camus. Follow him on Twitter. Like and retweet what he has to say. Send him a message and tell him that you are sorry to hear about the ruling. It's a disgrace. How can this be after everything that France, in particular, has gone through in the past decade plus? Do you remember seeing those photographs from Nice on the evening of the Bastille celebrations? It was essentially a long stretch of road on the seafront with these indiscriminate scattered lumps covered in canvas or tarpaulin. So keep in mind that even in the face of so much death, even as the streets are splattered with blood, it is a criminal offence to talk about it. Frankly, I'm no longer even buying into the political correctness line. Undoubtedly, people are afraid and frightened to talk about this, and political correctness plays a considerable role in that. But frankly, that is no longer a satisfactory answer. Something very peculiar is going on here, and I think that there is a self-conscious effort to see white Europeans demographically replaced. I think it's deliberate. And Camus is such a nice man. I mean, I've not met him, I don't know him, but nothing I've ever read of his at all has ever come across as even remotely belligerent or irate. He doesn't even come across as resentful. Not that you could blame him if he did. He comes across as someone immensely warm and amicable, but just somebody who's very genuinely concerned. He's worried. How can it be that it's criminal to talk about population replacement? You know, something that gets me about that Douglas Murray book, The Strange Death of Europe. That was #1 in Amazon for weeks and weeks. Now, what does the death of Europe mean? It means murder. It's an admission of genocide without ever having the balls to use the word genocide. So long as they can prosecute outspoken figures such as Camus, so long this will continue to be an issue. But they can't prosecute everybody. Not if everybody is talking about it. Not if everybody is rallying against it and accusing it for what it is. He's done nothing wrong. And he's brave. And it's time that you are brave also. The Islamization of our continent is unacceptable. There's really nothing more or less to add to that comment. It's unacceptable. This is now outright population replacement. There are only so many years you can angst and lament about it before you must come to the conclusion that actually the absence of any real attempt to deal with this crisis means it must be wanted. It must be. You don't continue to encourage and finance this kind of immigration unless you want to see the host population disappear. And that changes the situation from a major inconvenience to a genuine existential threat. From now on, anyone that makes excuses for this, I will consider an enemy. I consider you not only a willing participant, but an active author in genocide. As I said in other videos, the forces behind this are powerful. They are very powerful and very rich, but they are not omnipotent. And the major blunder they continue to make is thinking of themselves as God. There is only one God, and he died on the cross. I'm afraid there's really nothing more I can tell you about this story, other than it's a travesty and immensely disappointing. Give Camus a follow, give him a tweet, lend him some support. And I'd also really recommend his website. It's called the National Council of European Resistance, and I'll put a link to the website below. The National Council of European Resistance aims to bring together qualified personalities, French and European, who aspire to work for the defence of European civilization, to oppose the phenomenon of substitution of peoples currently at work on our continent, including in its Islamic dimension and, in general, to defeat replacementist totalitarianism everywhere. Here you can find almost all of Camus' speeches, both in French and English. There are quite a number of videos of him delivering them. There are also speeches by a number of other individuals. If you are interested in reading his speeches, one in particular I would recommend is called I Have Long Backed Away from Words. You can also contact the centre directly. I believe you can also join. The only caveat I will offer is that, of course, I hesitate to ever fully endorse anything that I'm not entirely familiar with myself. I've had a really good look over the website. I can't see any obvious links to any nefarious Israeli funding sources. But since there is a photograph of Tommy Robinson on the front page, I just wanted to be open and clear about that. That might well put some people off, so proceed with caution. What I did see recently is that Renaud Camus will be appearing at this year's American Renaissance conference. So it does mean that he at least has the endorsement of Jared Taylor, who I think a lot of people consider to be a very respectable and noble, trustworthy individual. So that gives me confidence. I think it's at least a good place to start reading more about the Great Replacement specifically. It seems to be specifically focused on population replacement, which is, it's good because it's starting to change the language from that of just immigration to language of actual either colonization or actual form of soft genocide. I think that's important for the next step. We will need that language. They have, I believe, Facebook and Twitter pages, so follow them on there. They have just short of 10,000 followers at the moment, which is not nearly enough, so get your asses on it. Again, I wish I could offer you something more substantial in light of this story, but I'm afraid that's really the long and the short of it. I'll obviously keep my eye on the story in the following weeks and update you if there's any significant news. So really, that's it for now. Have a peaceful evening.
La France et l'Europe sont 100 fois plus colonisées, et plus gravement qu'elles n'ont jamais colonisé elles-mêmes. La colonisation irréversible, c'est la colonisation démographique.